morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chad Wenger. My wife, Michelle, and I, we serve on the worship team and the prayer team, and we've been just blessed to be a part of Bright City for several years now. I'm really grateful this morning to have the opportunity to share with you on the topic of joy, the third week of Advent. I get the special light pink candle, which is really exciting to me. And if you're wondering, the color is light pink to signify a shift from sorrowful waiting into joyful anticipation of what's coming in the birth of Jesus. And so this morning, we're going to look forward to Jesus and to the joy that he brings. So this, of course, got me thinking, like, how do I define joy? How do we define this complicated word joy? And well, the dictionary definition is a feeling of great happiness or delight, intense emotional pleasure. Now, for those who may not know, my wife and I, we serve international students at the University of North Carolina with InterVarsity. And so because of that, I oftentimes like to just step back and think, like, what do people coming from other countries, what do they think of our culture and our practices and our celebrations and just these different things that we do? What are their observations about it? So it kind of caused my mind to go to this place of, if you were coming to the U.S., and you didn't know anything about Christmas. You didn't know it was a religious holiday. You'd never seen it celebrated before. And you began to see how we celebrate Christmas here. And you saw the lights and the stores and the trees. And you watched the movies that we have on TV. Like, what do you think your thought would be about where joy comes from around this Christmas time of year? I think you would think that it has to do with this on the screen. Right? You would think that it's when young Ivy Mistletoe leaves the frantic pace of big city living in search for deeper meaning in her life and perhaps to find love. So in her crisis, she returns to her small hometown of Frostburg, where she runs into a simple yet strikingly handsome young man with a very defined jawline and maybe a little too fitted of a flannel shirt, who also happens to be her former boyfriend, Felix Navidad. Well, their love then rekindles around an open fire, and they realize that true joy is found as they embrace and kiss under the mistletoe. Then off they go, where they drive off on a horse-drawn sleigh, and they settle into their simple yet surprisingly lucrative careers of Christmas tree farming and saving small-town Christmas festivals. Later, they give birth to a very talented daughter named Taylor, who grows up to become a huge pop star and falls in love with a football player, all hypothetically speaking, of course. So this joy, Christmas spirit, this feeling, is it this intense, emotional, romantic feeling as you fall in love under a slow falling snowflake? So Ike and Sharon told me no, that it's not. So we have to go into a different direction this morning. So while the dictionary definition defines joy in what I would call this temporary way, a feeling of great happiness that's largely situational, the reality is that many of these things are fleeting. They tend to be tied more towards circumstances like falling in love or winning a sports championship or enjoying a great meal or conversation. While there's nothing wrong with those things or finding happiness in them, they tend to all have a clock attached to them. For example, I am a Philadelphia Eagles football fan. I have been my whole life. Last year, we won the Super Bowl. It was amazing. I was so joyful. I couldn't believe it. I did a dance. I experienced all this joy. But this year, our offense has been struggling, and it's been really frustrating to watch. And it feels like all of the joy I and others experienced as Eagles fans last year has now just been stomped upon and crushed. And now many people might accuse Eagles fans of being negative or grumpy or perhaps quick-tempered. But I prefer the term that we are emotionally overcast. But anyways, when I think of the Christian understanding of joy, it's much deeper. It's tied to something that goes beyond temporary circumstances, much like what Alex talked about last week with peace. So Henry Nouwen was born in 1932 in the Netherlands, and he throughout his life was a prolific author, professor, and priest. He wrote more than 40 books throughout his lifetime, and many of these books are on the deeper work of Jesus in our lives. During his adult life, he left a prominent academic career to serve and live at L'Arche Daybreak in Toronto, which was a community for people with intellectual disabilities. He would serve these dear people and serve them for a couple of years. And oftentimes he would serve people that had such great needs, they weren't even able to express gratitude or thanksgiving to what he was doing. But he would serve their deepest needs in that place. And it was during this time that he began to greatly influence his understanding of God's love for people. And so with this in mind, I want us to look at this quote that he wrote as it relates to joy, because it's out of his own struggle, his own deep pain, his own sense of wrestling with purpose, that he writes this about joy. The joy that Jesus offers his disciples is his own joy, which flows from his intimate communion with the one who sent him. It is a joy that does not separate happy days from sad days, successful moments from moments of failure, experiences of honor from experiences of dishonor, passion from resurrection. This joy is a divine gift that does not leave us during times of illness, poverty, oppression, or persecution. It is present even when the world laughs or tortures, robs or maims, fights or kills. It is truly ecstatic, always moving us away from the house of fear into the house of love, and always proclaiming that death no longer has the final say, though its noise remains loud and its devastation visible. The joy of Jesus lifts up life to be celebrated. I love so much about this quote and his perspective on joy, but I specifically love the phrase towards the end where he says, joy is always moving us away from the house of fear and into the house of love. This is what true joy does. It's more than happiness or pleasure. It's that it feels intense for a moment, but then just needs to be replaced or replenished. Rather, true joy helps move us from a place that casts out fear and to help us to reside in love. This is the joy of the Lord. And I believe that this is something we all desire and we all long for, a joy, a happiness, not just in the butterflies of falling in love or getting a promotion, but in the love, peace, and presence that carries us through times of deep loss, mental health battles, concern for loved ones, and so on and on. So where does this joy come from? Well, no offense to our friends Felix Navidad and his newfound love, Ivy Mistletoe, but they are not the story of Christmas. But rather, the story of Christmas starts in this beautiful pasture under a peaceful night sky. The shepherds are in the fields keeping watch over their flocks, and they're keeping an eye out on the sheep. They're there, they're talking about the weather and who they think is going to win the upcoming Wool Bowl. Will it be the crochet hooks or the lamb chops? They don't know. But all of a sudden, a night that seemed so ordinary turned into the most extraordinary night. The angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord showed all around them, and they became terrified. I mean, who wouldn't be terrified? They weren't expecting this kind of night. But then the angel speaks, "Don't be afraid. For look, I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all people." So great joy for all people. So all people to experience this great joy. If all people are going to have this good news that produces great joy, it simply cannot be tied to circumstances or situations. It has to be tied to something eternal. It has to be something that's beyond space and time, something divine that has entered our world. And this is the good news of great joy that's so much better than a handsome guy in a green sweater and a girl in red, no matter how captivating their love story may be. And let's be honest, Hallmark has nailed it this time of year. So then, how does this good news of great joy move us from the house of fear into the house of love? I think this is a huge question for us because despite living in a time where we have more experiences at our disposal, more entertainment, more things to spike our dopamine, we are also the most anxious, depressed, fearful generation. We desperately want to move from this house of fear that we all too often reside in and journey towards this house of love. I even love in the Christmas story how the shepherds seem to move this way, where they're afraid when the angels first appear to them, but then they move towards Jesus, the house of love. So in order to see this joy of Jesus, it's good to look back, not just at his life, but also at the prophecy about the coming Messiah, and then to see how Jesus fulfilled these prophecies of the Messiah that he is. So there's this beautiful prophetic poem in Isaiah that reveals much about Jesus and his joy. In fact, the prophet Isaiah wrote much about the coming Messiah. And so this morning we're going to use some verses from chapter 35 of Isaiah. And now 34, the chapter before it, and 35 form a bit of a pair. 34 is about God's judgment towards the nations that oppose him. And then 35 is a reversal of that, showing us how God is going to bring restoration and favor for God's people in the coming Messiah. So using this passage, we can see three things that Jesus provides joy for to help us to move from the house of fear into this house of love. So the first point I want to make is that the birth of Jesus leads to restoration. So in verses 5, 6, and 7 of Isaiah 35, we read, "Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy. For water will gush in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The parched ground will become a pool and the thirsty lands spring." So throughout this chapter, we read about how the wilderness and this desert will blossom abundantly, how the cowardly will no longer fear, the eyes of the blind will be open, the deaf will hear, the lame will leap. It's this idea of what is dead and dry springing now forth new life. This future hope for Israel will come because of the Messiah, and Jesus is the fulfillment. He is this Messiah. In fact, we see this fulfillment when Jesus announces his ministry and his purpose as he begins his life and ministry, where he says this, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Hopefully you're able to see the similarities of what Jesus is proclaiming about his own ministry and what we read about in Isaiah 35. And when we read the Gospels about the life of Jesus, we see over and over and over again this being fulfilled throughout his ministry. That there's this very clear sense of restoration coming because of the presence and work of Jesus in our world and in our lives. So this time of year, this winter season, is always a great reminder of restoration for me. Because right now, when you look outside, everything seems brown, it seems dead, it seems like it's in this period of waiting. If you look into a forest, you can see so much further into the forest because there's so much vegetation just isn't there right now. Of course, as you know, in a few months, things will be very different here in North Carolina. Things will be lush with green and, of course, a lot of yellow as well. But in a few months, it's going to seem as though the earth has sprung forth with new life. But during this season of winter, there is restoration happening. Through the leaves falling and the natural just seasonal rhythms, there's deep rest and restoration happening, even though everything may feel dead or dormant. And so this encourages me because so often when we look at our lives or we look at this world, we're presented with so much brokenness, pain, and disappointment. And so it can be easy to lose sight and even hope in restoration that is taking place beyond maybe what our physical eyes may be able to see. And so when I think about my own life, when I think about the things that maybe move me from more love to a place of fear, it's largely because I'm overlooking or I'm disregarding the restorative work of Jesus in my life and in the world around me. I can find myself fixated on negative or difficult circumstances to such an extent that joy seems to leave and fear and despair become loud. So think of it like this. If you were walking through a hard season or a difficult season and you knew that that season would end in 6 months or 2 years or whatever that may be, you would likely take a great deal of hope that God is at work and that things are being restored. You'd say, I can get through this because I know there's an end date to what I'm experiencing now. But often what's so hard about these kind of seasons is we don't know if, when, or how things will come to a close. We don't know the outcomes of what's going to happen on this earth. And if we did know the outcomes, we would miss out on so much of faith and trust in the journey of trusting Jesus in the midst of our uncertain situation. So while it may be nice to know it's exactly going to happen like this, not knowing invites us into a deep sense of trust and faith in Jesus, to rest in him and to allow him to be the one that's doing the restorative work. And so I found in these kind of seasons, if I can step back and focus on Jesus, remember his ministry and how he brought restoration to so many and continues to bring it, if I can express gratitude in him, while the circumstances may not change in that moment, my satisfaction, my contentment can reside in him, which will bring much more joy in my life. The other thing I'm reminded of is that this type of restoration process is not something that I can always see, and it's not something I'm in charge of. And so it requires me to lay down my will, surrender to Jesus, and place my trust in him. The thing about the restoration that Isaiah is talking about and that Jesus provides is that is lasting. It takes what is dead and it springs forth life. It takes what is old and makes it new. The restoration is not a temporary fix or solution. It's a promise for lasting joy. The second thing then I notice in this passage from Isaiah is this language that he uses about finding the way. So the birth of Jesus provides the way. So in verses 8 and 9, we read that a road will be there and a way. It will be called the holy way. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for the one who walks the path. Fools will not wander on it. There will be no lion there, and no vicious beast will go up on it. They will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk on it. There will be a road, the holy way, called the holy way, and Jesus reveals how he is the fulfillment of this prophetic word as well. So on the night that Jesus is betrayed, he's spending time with his disciples and he's teaching them many things and showing them things. And we read this interaction. Lord, Thomas said, he said, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Well, Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we don't know the way, and Jesus says, I am the way. I am the holy way. Jesus is saying, I am the Messiah that has been prophesied about, and I am the way to eternal life. He's saying, you do know the way because you know me. The early church even adopted this term, the way, for identifying themselves. They followed the way of Jesus. This is why we focus on practicing the way twice a year with 2 different series, learning spiritual rhythms and practices that point us towards Jesus and form our lives around him. So another thing, when I think about my own life, another thing that causes me to move towards fear away from love is when I don't know the direction or the way in my life, where decisions seem to come so fast or feel so difficult that I get overwhelmed, and I can echo Thomas by saying, we don't know the way. Help me to understand the way. But joy comes in the way of Jesus, life with him. So joy is not knowing exactly what the future will hold, but joy is a life of faith and trust in him, a life of fellowship with Jesus because of his presence with us and in this world. So joy just doesn't come as we arrive at a certain destination, but joy is enjoying the journey with Jesus. So a few years ago, our family moved here from North Carolina, and this was a big deal for us. We had lived in central Pennsylvania our entire lives. We were pastoring a church with just the most amazing, supportive people who became just deep, dear friends for us. And we began to feel, though, God calling us out of that season and into a new season, but this new season was very unknown. So stepping into something like that was incredibly unsettling, but we wanted to do our best to walk this out with obedience. So during this time, I took many what I called walks with Jesus in those days. And I would hike on the Appalachian Trail and pray. And apparently, I just learned this, that people in the South say Appalachian different than people in the North. So I'm going to continue to say it how I grew up saying it. But anyways, I would go on the Appalachian Trail and pray, and I would talk with Jesus. And I would oftentimes pray out loud. Now, the nice thing about this trail is that it's very long, and so oftentimes people will hike for quite extended periods of time. And so if they are hiking on it for quite an extended period of time, and you're hiking on the trail praying out loud, you can typically smell them coming from quite a distance. And so you can switch from praying out loud to praying in your head as you walk past them so they don't think that you're crazy. Just a little pro tip if you ever want to pray on a trail out loud. So anyways, I would on these trails, as I prayed, I would ask God for things. I would express fears and frustrations. I'd express my wondering and deepest questions and wrestle with God on many things. And I would ask for his intervention. But there was one day where I was on the trail and I was looking ahead at the path. And I noticed that I could see clearly the path marked out in front of me, somewhat like this picture that's behind me. But the further that I looked ahead on the trail, I realized that the trail disappeared. I wasn't able to see it, either because the horizon changed, the trail turned, or the woods just kind of grew up around it. But either way, I could only see so far in front of me. So while it was clear, I didn't see the full picture, and I could not see the destination. So in this moment, I became encouraged with this reality, that this is largely what walking this path of the redeemed, the way of Jesus, looks like, where you might be able to only see the next few steps clearly, and maybe those few steps are really easy to follow. And depending on your season, that clarity may be like one little step in front of you, or it may feel like you're in a wide open field where you can see the path as far as your eyes will take you. But either way, what's promised is not necessarily seeing the full destination of what's going to happen here on earth in our lives, but rather what is promised is the ongoing presence and life of Jesus as we walk with him, that he is the way of life with us, that he is our Messiah, our Savior, that he journeys this life with us. And so that day when I noticed this, I realized how the Christian life is not just like this straight linear line. It's not always easy and it's not always clear, but it is a life of faith. And this journeying with Jesus and the way of Jesus, what helps move us to journey from the house of fear to love. The joy is found in walking with Jesus, even in the unknown. As we wrestle with fears, purpose, lack of clarity, we can feel a sense of confidence and peace and even joy that can be truly hard to explain, but we can experience it because of Jesus. My last point then is that the birth of Jesus brings joy over sorrow and trouble. The last verse in Isaiah 35, we read, "And the ransomed of the Lord will return and come to Zion with singing, crowned with unending joy. Joy and gladness will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee." So the poem ends with Isaiah saying how as they come into Zion, as they sing, they'll be crowned with this unending joy, that joy and gladness will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee. They will run away. And so Jesus is the fulfillment of this joy over sorrow as well. He is the one that overtakes sorrow. So he says this again a little bit later to his disciples on the night he's betrayed, when he's teaching them. He says, "When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her time has come. But when she has given birth to a child, she no longer remembers the suffering because of the joy that a person has been born into the world. So you also have sorrow now, but I will see you again. Your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy from you." So suffering may be present now, but Jesus is coming again. Advent is a reminder of this, that we are waiting for the Messiah to return. It is a reminder that we're anticipating the second coming of Jesus as we celebrate his birth as well. And when Jesus comes back, we'll experience the fullness of his kingdom will be realized. And so we're living in this period of the already but not yet, where we see the kingdom of God at work, but it's not fully realized. Now you might think, Chad, I have so much sorrow right now or difficulty. I see that truth that Jesus is coming again. I can see that and understand it. But how do I wait for this when it feels like sorrow are winning and joy and gladness are the ones that are being overtaken and running away for the hills? So one day, a friend and I were having lunch. And he said something during this lunch that I have been thinking about over and over again for years. He was recounting to me as we ate, he was recounting to me this extremely difficult time that he went through in his life that I was familiar with. But it was a gut-wrenching time for him. It was a very difficult relationship situation. The situation was that his coming to faith in Jesus had caused significant issues for his family, because the way they viewed it was his turning to Jesus was viewed as him turning away from his family. So at the time of the lunch, things had become much better for him in this relationship. Much restoration had taken place. But what he told me was that he missed those days of sorrow. And I about choked on my General Tso's when we were eating lunch. I was like, what do you mean you missed that time? I remember how difficult it was for him. How do you miss a time where you faced a situation that you literally could not solve without divine intervention? It's like, are you okay? Are we like eating the same thing? And what he began to express to me and explain to me was that he missed the intimacy of that struggle of time. That it was such an intense time where it was filled with anguish and pain, sleepless nights and feelings of betrayal and misunderstanding. But in the midst of that time, it drove him to his knees in a way where he was confronted with a deep truth that is really a truth for all of us, that he needed and we need God fully. And he came face to face with that. And in the midst of that, the Lord met him in such a peaceful, intimate way that even brought joy in the midst of the difficult circumstances. Now, at the lunch, while he was grateful the Lord had brought much restoration in those relationships, he did recognize the unique intimacy and joy in the Lord that came in the midst of this struggle and dependency on the Lord alone. So in his second letter to the church in Corinth, Paul is encouraging and teaching the church there how to live as the church. And he wants them to know that he and the apostles, they're suffering many things, but they do it for the truth and to be faithful ministers of Jesus. He concludes this section by saying, our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, and yet we have everything. So Paul is acknowledging that you don't need to ignore sorrow or not grieve the pain or loss that you feel, but his writing also reminds us that these things can coexist, and even more present are joy, generosity, and having everything in the Lord. And to those things have no end. So while heartache will eventually cease, poverty will end. With the Lord, we can have everything, and there is no end to his reign. So when I look out on a room like this, and it's filled with different stories and different places of faith and different backgrounds and different experiences, it can be difficult to know how to articulate, how to find joy in the midst of all of the different things that you may be experiencing and walking through in your current situation. So just wonder with me for a moment. Do you think that we in our culture have perhaps idolized things like safety, comfort, prosperity to such a degree that we've attached the word joy to those things rather than attaching joy to the work of Jesus and the deep work that he wants to do in our lives and through our lives, no matter what season? So this morning, I just want to simply invite you to allow Jesus to define this word joy for you, because the joy that Jesus offers us is not fleeting. It is everlasting, and it goes with us. So we can't talk about joy without understanding, too, that Jesus did not come begrudgingly or reluctantly on that first Christmas day. But rather, as the writer of Hebrews says, that it was for the joy that lay before him that he endured the cross, despising its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So at my house, my family, they oftentimes will call me Eagle Eyes. Actually, that's not true. Nobody calls me that. I only call myself that. But here's the thing. If something around our house is missing, everybody comes running towards me. They say, Daddy, Daddy, honey, like I can't find my stuffy, my cell phone, my keys, my left shoe, my lippy, which apparently is chapstick. And they come to me and they say, nothing in this world will be made right until you can find the lost thing. And so typically what happens is I put on this cape that I had embroidered with eagle eyes. It helps me find things. And then I groan a little bit that the Lord has blessed me with this ability to find things that have been lost around the house. And I typically just out of love and humility try to remind my family how blessed and lucky they are to have a father, husband who can search around the house and find things that are lost, and they should be grateful because without me, there would be great I don't know, devastation. And then I go and I find the thing. Now this happens anywhere between 12 and 1,500 times a day, but this is the purpose that I have on earth, so I embrace it. Now obviously I'm exaggerating and hopefully displaying some of my own imperfection in my attitude that I'm not necessarily proud of, but the reason I'm sharing this is because I wonder if for some of us that this is the attitude that we think that Jesus took as he came to earth on Christmas, that we think that maybe Jesus came through this like gritted teeth, that he came here in that way, where he's like, the humans just can't get it right. They keep grumbling when I provided. They keep choosing their own way. The old sacrificial system isn't doing it, so I guess it's just up to me to go down there and fix it for them. But that's not the attitude that Jesus had. But rather, Jesus came on Christmas out of deep love. Jesus came in love and humility so that we can find life. He wanted to bring us joy. Jesus came because of compassion and love to offer his life in grace and mercy and truth, because he is the way of salvation for us. And he deeply loves each and every one of us because God is love. He is the definition of this. And so because of his great love, because of Emmanuel, God living among us and being with us, because of Christmas, we can experience his joy as he moves us from the house of fear to his house of love. He is love, and it is his house that we reside in, and it is his joy that moves us there. So as we close, I just want to invite you with this question to ask is like, how is Jesus inviting you into his joy today? How is he revealing his restoration, his way and his joy over suffering to you today? I'm going to invite you to take a moment and just pray and reflect, and our prayer team will be on the sides as well. And we'd just love to invite you to go and pray with them. Maybe you need a new perspective on joy and you just want to ask them to pray that over you. One of the beautiful things we get to do each week is to pray in person with others within our community here, and it's such an important part of us coming together. And so I just invite you to receive that this morning as well. But just take a moment and reflect on how is Jesus inviting you into his joy today, and may he bless you this morning.